Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to have you joining us again today. You're joining Tom Mines, myself, and my friend Ron Nielsen. I'm actually here on behalf of Ron because he's the author, not me, for the history of federal lands in the United States and the violence of faction. We've been doing what I call book videos throughout the series to help complement his book and to help offer some clarification for those that are reading the book that are struggling. It is very nutrient dense. What did we say? Information dense?
Information dense is what people have said to me before.
I call it nutrient dense. Anyway, it's really great considering the fact that we're not really getting much real food anymore, which is really kind of interesting. But so as we normally do, I would like to be able to do a summary of the last video we did, actually the last book video we did. If you have not watched the last video we did jump away a little bit and we started talking about perspectives and solutions. And that will be on the different playlists that will, if it's not posted on Ron's website, it should be shortly. Um, but the last book video we did, we were talking about the different acts of the time, what they did, how were they to be seen. We talked a little bit about the ideals of other factions like the Sagebrush Rebellion factions, their beliefs, things of that nature. We talked a little bit about patent process. We talked about rights actually dependent on SCOTUS, which was an interesting deviation for me because I'm like, rights come from God. And he's like, well, not unless SCOTUS actually wants to tell you what they are. And there's actually an argument for that I think is very important for us to understand to be able to help set the stage for the continual knowledge that we're going to be getting in this book. If we compartmentalize this book is not meant for somebody that can say, I've studied the Constitution for 14 years and it says it right here. We have arguments for that. And I think it's important. We talked about debt as a driver for land. We talked about the difference between ownership and disposal programs, which is also important. That helps with our understanding of SCOTUS rights and things of that nature. Um, and we talked about the appointment of governors as states and territories move into statehood and things of that nature. So if you haven't watched Video Book 7 or listened to that, that'll be pages we covered about page 22 to 24. And so you might be interested in looking at that. Um, so as we move into today, I had found out I was talking to Ron and told him, "Oh, we're a little bit short of chapter 3, so we're going to say for all intents and purposes that we're starting at chapter 3 today." Although the page before that, I told Ron, I said, Ron, if you could talk to us about the several programs that we're working together, and all that, and I can reiterate those, but I didn't want to talk over you and say, Ron, thanks for joining me today, man.
Well, thanks for having me, and with a additional time to be able to explain some of these complicated subjects that I bring up in the book, and to segue into chapter 3, which I'm glad that you give me the opportunity to talk about this a little bit because it's the perfect segue. All right, so if we're just gonna right now start this off by an explanation of what constituted the government's disposal program. And like I say in the book, it was a bunch of different programs all wrapped up into one. Okay. So you had a sale of land program. Well, typically, you wouldn't think of the United States government as being able to sell anything, but here they were selling land, right? So that tells you about the corporate nature of the United States right there. They were selling land. Okay. Um, this is a lot of people haven't quite equated two and two here. It's like, well, okay, well, land barons sell land. Well, United States government has been, in the history of the United States, the largest land baron in the United States. Go ahead, Tom.
Can we the first in the way that I look at things, I like somebody to say, okay, give me the bullet points first and then explain what they are. So you can either do it or I can. We're looking at the
Go ahead.
mid chapter page 25. You said, and I quote, there are several programs that we're working together here. We had a military government Big Brother program. Number two, we had territorial vassal state program. We had a state admission program. That was number three. And number four, a sale of land and economic stimulus
It
program.
was. It was an economic
All
stimulus.
working
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that you will manage to, in your own intelligent way, break those down so that we will understand what each one is and how they
Yeah.
sort of work together or
So
didn't.
I'm dealing with the stimulus part of the program right now, and that is the sale of land, the grants of land to settlers, the grants of land to mining, people doing mining, the grants of land to people under the Stock Raising Act. There are grants going on here, and these are all stimulus programs. We're well acquainted now with the government's use of stimulus programs. Okay, this all began with the land program. They were stimulating the United States economy. Now, remember, in previous videos, I said the way that the program was structured was that United States citizens would go into the territories. They buy a chunk of land, they create some sort of economic, commercial activity on it that would add to the commercial activity of the nation worldwide. So the government got two shots at it. They sold the land and got an immediate hit where they could pay off some debt. And then number two, they had a residual income. So the United States government in the land program was acting in a corporate manner. Okay. So yeah, so the debt that the United States was in was driving this commercial enterprise of the United States government to sell land and create commercial activity. Okay. In this structure, you had other things like you had a creation of states program, meaning that they were going to carve out of this huge vast chunk of land that they got states, 6 states, I think, in the 6 or 7 states in the Northwest Territories.
Is
And
this part of the same one, or is this a different one?
we're dealing with the Northwest Ordinance Territorial System right now.
No, but I mean, is this part of the sale of land stimulus program, or are we moving on to one of the other three things you talked about? Sorry.
Well, I'm so I brought up the stimulus program, and I
Okay.
think I've fleshed it out. I mean, I'm not getting into details, but I'm telling you what it's about.
No, it's
So the
fine.
sale of land.
Okay. So then we have, because we still had the other three, and so I'm kind of particular.
I'm going to go through
Stay
each
within
one
the
of them
lines.
systematically.
Okay. Okay.
I'm going
Good.
to build them
All
out
right.
and flesh them out
Okay.
systematically.
Good.
So
Thank you.
I've dealt with the stimulus program.
Okay.
Now we have a creation of states program. Now we've covered that a great deal. I've gone into the creation of states portion of the program quite a bit. We had a military program where the United States military was overseeing the entire thing because Arthur St. Clair was running the military program from Los Santoville in Cincinnati, Ohio, right? So what have I covered so far? The economic stimulus program, the creation of states program, and then the military program. Okay. Now there are some other portions of the program that were in there as well that you highlighted earlier. And what were those?
I forget. No.
Did
Uh,
you bullet point them?
you had military Big Brother program, the territorial vassal state program, the
Okay,
state
we've covered
admission
the vassal
program.
state. Yeah,
Okay.
we've covered the vassal state program,
Okay.
and that was a switch from membership in the Confederacy in the Northwest Ordinance and the Southwest Ordinance areas, and then the divide and the change that occurred from the Louisiana Purchase onward. That was from the Louisiana Purchase to the west, all of that. So that's Idaho, Oregon, Washington, Montana, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, all those 11 western states, up to and including all of the Louisiana properties, territories, were all included in the vassal state program. Okay.
Mhm.
So, all right. So, the United States government, you have this marriage of all these different programs ran by the United States military. It was being ran by a territorial militaristic system. You can look at the Arthur St. Clair government as a type of military dictatorship. That's what it was. It was a style of military dictatorship. It was not supposed to be applicable into constitutional areas, meaning states that were members of the Confederacy. Later on, it became membership in the Union. But the states that were members in that territorial military dictatorship program, which it was, because when we get into the legal structure of how the thing operated, you'll clearly see that it had in its structure, it was designed to be and operate in a sort of a military dictatorship fashion, right? Not the constitutional fashion. There's only two systems that you had working in the United States was a territorial system and the constitutional system of the 13 states originally expanded their statehood. By the time they got to the Louisiana Purchase, they had 27 states that had been part of the Confederate States in that agreement. Okay, so you've got this if you think about the massive this system, this government program was, as far as I can understand, it is their largest program to date.
Ron,
Was this program?
we had a
Never been
really
anything like it in magnitude.
we had a really bad oops just a minute ago, and things froze for longer than I'd like to admit. So I don't know if you can go. I don't know where to go back to,
Well,
but it
I'm
was a bad
sorry.
it was a bad one, and you're probably on a roll too. Um,
I was on a roll because I was explaining the magnitude of the program, right? So
mhm.
what I would like people to understand right now is, as you bullet pointed off the high points of what the program was about, if you just think about the size of this thing, okay, you had a state creation program, an economic stimulus program, a grant program, a creation of states, a vassal state program that it morphed into, all under the military dictatorship style. Not state. I'm not saying that they were that the Arthur St. Clair government was applying dictatorial powers, but the system didn't have any constitutional constraints on it. It could have acted in a dictatorial fashion. Nothing would have prevented it. It didn't, luckily. But as you can clearly see, this is where we have to start talking about the form of law employed. The reason why is because in a free society, in our constitutional society, what differentiates our system of government from everything else is the guarantee of private rights. It allows the United States citizen to take the government to task if we have our rights deprived from us. That's a lot of power to give the United States citizen. It's tremendous power to constrain the government. In the territories, you didn't have that. There was no private rights in the territories to assert a restriction against the government. It didn't exist. Okay, so right off the bat, we have to understand the entire territorial program operated with the citizens in these areas not having access to the guarantee of private rights. The entire thing until they were admitted into statehood. Seriously, that's exactly what the case law bears out and exactly how the program was ran. Now, this is sensitive because the government doesn't like talking about this. Because look, let's be honest. If the United States government can operate a portion of its power that circumvents the restrictions of private rights, would it not do so? And would it be compelled to tell you about it? No. And it's been doing it for over 230 years. It's the longest exercise power that's contained in the Constitution is the exclusive power that circumvents private rights. That's the longest applied power of the government. They've applied it longer than any other power in the Constitution. So we have to talk a little bit about the law in the territories. Well, if you didn't have a constitution, what was the law in the territories? Well, the Northwest Ordinance is pretty clear. In the United States, the applicable law in the territories was called the common law. And it's laid out in the Northwest Ordinance that that would be the applicable law in the territories, the common law. The common law would be in effect until congressional legislation sort of overturned it, right? So it's well understood in American jurisprudence that the common law was in effect unless supplanted by statutes.
So that brings
There
up a
is a
real
fact.
that
Go ahead.
I'm glad you can remember what you're saying. Back in the day when we were studying, wasn't there, and I'm not sure if it was theory or fact or whatever, but wasn't there a thing about the United States Code? And I don't know if this is on topic or not, but the United States Code actually wasn't codified. Does this have anything to do with the fact that I don't know what I was trying to say. Anyway,
Well, let me.
oh,
I think I know where you're going. So let me just go ahead and
okay,
answer what I think it is that you're the direction I think you're going.
okay.
There, there's a lot of people in the United States that have this idea that the common law is the original intended system of law in the United States, and that it was supplanted by statutes and this sort of thing. That's wrong. The system of common law was the default legal position in the territories only. And it would only be supplanted when Congress created legislation that went right to work in the territory. Then, whatever legislation that Congress created in that area of law or policy would then supplant the common law for that policy, for that area of law only. Only. So, look at it this way: until Congress creates legislation, the common law is in effect, right? So,
Right.
the Constitution confers on Congress an Article 1 power to create legislation.
Hmm.
Without Congress uh, engaging in its Article 1 power, they had to have a system of law applicable to the territory. Otherwise, it'd be just mayhem and chaos. So, in the Northwest Ordinance, they mandated that the system of law that will be in play in the territories would be the common law.
And so the common law essentially has been replaced now that the legislature has enacted statutes, right? The Congress.
There are very few areas where the common law is still applicable. Very few. Most of the areas where the United States congressional legislature would act on its territory, there's very few areas where it hasn't done that.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So in those few areas where it hasn't legislated, the common law is still in effect.
Okay. That's a good thing to mention. And I don't know why I just have to stop bringing in these tangents because I think in some of the things that we had learned, I think New York was the only state that never sort of had common law, but maybe I could have that messed up. Anyway, so you had a picture on 26. I was going to bring it up, but I'd have to look for it, and I don't know if people have time to, being on a video for an hour is long enough anyway when people have such short attention spans for the most part. But in the map that you have on 26, you show the difference between federal ownership of land and
I've got that map. Can I bring it up and show it?
yeah, you should be
Screen
able to hit
share with you.
share screen if you want.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Let me share. Okay, you see that?
Yeah, you got it. Oh, that's way better than the one that's in the book. Nice.
Okay, this is currently what the federal land holdings look like. So you can see Idaho here. It's about 60, between 61 and 63%. There's some dispute over that, but you can see there are areas here like uh, Arizona that are just dominated, right? Nevada, New Mexico, it's crazy, you know. This is kind of a heartland of federal land ownership right through here.
Wow.
Okay, so when we talk about the Northwest Ordinance, we're talking Minnesota, Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, um, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio. That's the Northwest Territory. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. So 7 states, and then down in here you get Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri. You have the Missouri the Missouri Compromise in here that was part of the whole deal. I should have probably wrote a little bit more in the book about that, but it wasn't that much of a big deal. Aside from the fact that if you look right, if you look on our map, right about here is where you're going to get the 98th meridian. So as you can see, west of the 98th meridian, these adjoining states here, they're all pretty much federal land free, right?
Mhm.
And there's some explanation as to why that is. These states ended up becoming part of the Confederacy. They were admitted into the Confederacy.
Okay, I got a
You
question.
can only, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, two of them. Actually, could this map be a pretty good map to be able to justify, when we were talking about national, we were talking about state sovereignty, right? We're talking about how are you
Yeah.
going to implement state sovereignty in states that have, ownership of large ownership of federal land. So I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe this map will help us understand exactly how much sovereignty each state has.
That
Is that one way
that's a
of
good
looking
point.
at
Let
it?
me point. Let me yeah. Let me
I'm
point out
moving to
something
Iowa.
else too. Let's point out Idaho really quick. You would think that all the areas in white would be under state control.
Except those are rivers.
That's not necessarily accurate, right?
Mhm.
Because there's some of these areas in white that are are owned by corporations and this sort of thing. And while you would think that the state of Idaho can apply its 10th Amendment power, it's going to be able to apply some of its 10th Amendment power here, right? But how much of, like, just look at the state of Idaho here. You got maybe less than 13%, maybe 13, 15% of the state where you can apply a 10th Amendment power. All the areas in red you can't.
Mm.
You can't because government has a jurisdiction.
Ron,
You can't apply 10th Amendment power where the government's dominant. You can't.
I think my house is in one of those white areas, man. I'm kidding. I'm sorry.
So, well, it gets a little dicey. It's like, well, okay, well, how much of the white areas can the state apply its 10th Amendment powers? Like, well, we don't really know because we don't know how much of the areas in white are directly under state control or how much are under a corporate control, but just won't adhere to state, because you would think, okay, well, if you got private property in the state of Idaho by virtue of the citizen, you should count that all these citizens would be part of the state's political apparatus. But what we're beginning to see here is like that may not exactly be the case. There's something called incorporation in the state. Now, we talked about incorporation here in these videos about what incorporation entails at the federal land level, right? The incorporation of federal land into membership into the Union of States.
Is that selective?
In order to get No, the
Okay.
selective incorporation is the court's
Sorry.
adoption of the Bill of Rights to use against the states. That's
Okay.
selective incorporation.
Okay.
All right, so land incorporation, meaning that the federal lands will be made a part of. So all the areas in red to be made a part of the United States. That's what incorporation means. But what I've never been able to find in the treaties. So let's just look at the Northwest Treaty. Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and parts of Montana were included in the Northwest Treaty with England. I've read that treaty. There's no incorporation language in that treaty. That means all of the areas in red that were handed over to the United States from that treaty were not incorporated into the Union. They were not made a part of the United States. All right, let's look at the Mexican treaty, the treaty with Mexico. That's California, Arizona, parts of New Mexico, down in New Mexico, parts of Arizona here, and I don't think Utah was a part of that, but they had a huge chunk here. Did the treaty with Mexico have incorporation language in it? No, it did not. That means everything we got from Mexico at the close of the Mexican War was not incorporated either.
So what does that mean? So what does that actually mean? I mean, you've got Aztlan, right? You've got the, sorry, I'm getting too
So
excited.
one more. The remainder of the territory would be the Louisiana Purchase from the 98th meridian this way. When you read the treaty with France and the acquisition of the property, you will not find incorporation language. So all of the major treaties that gave all of the Western United States over to the United States from France, England, Mexico, none of them had incorporation language. Okay. The only thing that did that had incorporation language, as we saw, was Alaska. We got that from the Rasmussen decision. Of course, you go look at the Alaska Treaty with Russia, you will see that the incorporation language is in there. Okay, so we want to know in the treaty, did the foreign nations incorporate those areas in the treaties? No, they did not. Okay, the next one would be admission into the Union. When all the admission acts were formed, were the areas incorporated into the United States? There is no incorporation language in the states, in the Western states, in uh, uh, in, in their admission acts. There was no incorporation language. So the two shots that we would have had to incorporate all of this land into the United States, both of them failed to incorporate. There are no other acts of Congress that could have done that. Now, they could legislate right now and do that with legislation right now, but they've never done it.
So what does this mean for us then? If
Okay, what this means is that the guarantee of private rights is not applicable in all the red areas. The guarantee of private rights is not applicable. What changes that is when you incorporate. When you incorporate, you now have to apply private rights to all the areas in red.
okay, that's important.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
it's
good.
very
That's huge.
important.
Hmm. Good.
Okay, so you can see the size of the United States program, and you have to understand that it was ran in a military fashion by a military system. So I'm asking you right now, if everything that I've told you is true, do we have any corollary between this system that existed in the building of the United States and what we have right now?
It's the same, right?
It's the same. The only difference
Is
between
we
the
is
system
we thought we
we
had sovereignty. That's what the difference is.
that's the difference. We thought
Yeah.
that when all of these areas were
Oh my gosh.
admitted into the union, that private rights would be applicable in all the states, and it's just not true. That's why we're in the mess that we're in.
So does it so
Now,
okay.
go ahead.
No. So now that we've it's really good that you bring that up because maybe I just needed to hear it again because I read it in the book and I was still like, I don't really understand it. But so in the red areas, it means that there's no guarantee of private rights.
That's right.
Period. Okay. So
Period.
so when we talk a lot about sovereignty, because we're going to end up talking about it more because that's just where things are going. You've got all of these other states that are white. They're not, I can guarantee you they're not aware of what you know. But
That's right.
does it put states like Iowa, um, Kansas, and some of these other ones, it obviously seems to put them in a better position if they knew it, but do what do they know, I guess? Um, and should we be watching some of these states, or are they all under the same sort of vassal state delusion? That's a good one.
Well, the vassal state arrangement begins over here in the Western United States where you see all this red.
Right.
It
Okay.
started at the Louisiana Purchase because they
Okay.
were going to adopt an ownership principle.
Okay.
But as you can see in these states right here bordering the 98th meridian, that these areas were turned over to United States citizens. They bought up all this land, and that's why there's so much white here.
But they're still putting, but the federal government, in its desire to be able to control just about everything, it really has tried to force all of the other states into an inferior position anyway. Whether
It's
it was
done that
some,
with the legal system.
right. So, and so it goes back to my question when it just as it relates to sovereignty only, is when you have areas like Iowa and Kansas and some of these other things, um, are they under that sort of inferior delusion? I guess I don't know what else to call it.
Well,
Or
it's really simple to answer that question. All the areas in white are where you can apply 10th Amendment power. Just look at the map.
you hear that, Iowa?
Yeah, just look at the map.
Well,
It tells you everything you need to know about the political situation of all the states. White, 10th Amendment power. Red, federal power.
and is there any way to be able to turn the red white?
You have to change ownership.
And that can be done, which is part of what your mission is, right?
That's part of what my mission is, to turn all of the red white as possible.
Nice.
So how do you do that? You have to restart the disposal program. What are the barriers to that? FLTMA. Is FLTMA constitutional? No, it is not.
Oh, Supreme Court decision, right?
Yeah, it's going to, in the future, there will be a Supreme Court decision that would declare FLTMA unconstitutional, at least the ownership principle. The rest of it, I don't know. But the ownership principle of FLTMA will be declared unconstitutional, that the government cannot change the disposal program without amending the U.S. Constitution to do it, period.
Nice. Nice. So should we go into chapter 3 or do you have more to say? I mean, I think we already are
That's it.
actually.
We'll go into chapter 3, and that segues right into the United States military and the territories.
Okay, cool. So I had some
So
notes.
what I do,
Okay.
go ahead.
No, I'm just reading off the notes in my margins and then hoping that they'll trigger something so you don't just stare at me and go, what?
Oh, please go ahead.
I just it's we're kind of just I'm actually kind of just winging it. But so the United States military in the territories, I think it's we've covered a little bit about the military industrial complex. I think anybody that's watching this has a pretty firm grasp on what that's all about. Um, you mentioned, I wrote in the notes there, U.S. military vital component for land programs. I think we did cover that. If you need to jump in on that, you can. Um, the feds tried to discourage colonies from the idea of government. Now, I'm not surprised by this, and I think
Well, no, no. Hold on, stop. So the self-government experiment is what we have now. The federal government was not trying to discourage that. England was.
oh, okay.
England was trying to discourage that. And that's, see, the English had hold up in fact, here, let's bring up this map. England, after the Treaty of Paris, they
Mhm.
sent a contingent of, I think it was in Wisconsin here, somewhere around this area, around the Great Lakes. There was a contingent of Maumee Indians. The English made a pact with the Maumee Rapid Indians. And when Arthur St. Clair came over to Cincinnati, one of the things they had to contend with was this merger or treaty between the English and the Maumee Rapid Indians. And I write about that extensively in some of these military engagements between this English Maumee Rapids Indian, what they call it was Chief Little Turtles and the rest of the turtles, right? And they were in Ohio and they were trying to, protect the settlement, the settlers from coming into here and getting land and creating economic activity and this sort of thing. And so they had some huge battles. In fact, one of the greatest losses the United States military has ever suffered was during this campaign at the hands of the English Maumee Rapid Indians while Arthur St. Clair was trying to settle and protect the Northwest Territories, right?
Right.
And I write about it extensively because it gives you an idea of the level of military activity that was taking place just to settle this area.
Okay. So I don't know if it's been a bit since I've read, and it has actually, but so Ohio keeps coming up in my own mind, and I'm thinking, now we had the Northwest Ordinance, but the Northwest Ordinance, Ohio was part of something different, right?
No, Ohio was the seat of the territorial government, the national territorial government. So
So
after
which
the go ahead.
so which was the Southwest Ordinance that was done
Yeah,
through?
that was down here in Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri.
Okay, okay, all right, sorry. My confusion, sorry.
Right? So you got the Northwest government up here and then the Southwest government down here.
Okay, all right, got it. Okay.
This right here is the dividing line between all of the properties east of the 98th meridian and all the territories west of the 98th meridian. We're going to call these properties now because you can see they're mostly white.
Hmm.
And here, when it's mostly red, they're not properties, they're territories. Okay, so all the red's territorial, all the white is property.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was taking notes. Um,
Okay.
so then let's see. So we're on 28. You talked about Arthur Sinclair being the governor of Ohio.
Yep.
Uh, the U.S. had earned itself a standing army capable of defending territorial possession. So that sort of blows the idea that the Constitution says that we don't have any standing armies, as I was once led to believe. Um, and his staging ground in Fort Washington was the centerpiece for the settlement program due to the country's distrust in standing armies. Only a force large enough to do the job was conscripted and consisted of Colonel Josiah Harmer's regiment. So I don't know if you need to add any more of that, but I do know that it gets a little bit confusing when you start talking about the act of Congress in 1791 that created two regiments. Would you mind sort of clarifying that a little bit?
Yeah. So there prior to Arthur St. Clair's arrival, we have to understand that this remainder of the military is a holdover from our Revolutionary War against the English, right? So we had a Revolutionary War against England. We signed the Treaty of Paris. The military wasn't necessarily disbanded, right? What was left of it was sent over to Arthur St. Clair in the territories in Ohio, right? And so
Hmm.
Congress acted right after. So 1783 is when the Treaty of Paris. So by 1791, under the constitutional government, an act of Congress. So 1789 is when we see the constitutional government. 1791, they deliberate, they create some legislation, and they reorganize the United States army into two regiments under the command of Colonel Josiah Harmer, and then of course Arthur St. Clair is already moved into Ohio to take command of the entire apparatus. So they were under immediate field command of Colonel Josiah Harmer, but he answered to Arthur St. Clair, who was the general and the commander in chief of the military. So when he went into Ohio and he took command of what was left of Americans fighting for us, he demanded that the United States give him more because they had got their asses whipped by the Maumee Rapid Indians. They just got their asses handed to them. It was the worst defeat, maybe one of the worst defeats in a single engagement in American history. It was terrible. They lost 50% because they were ambushed by the Maumee Rapid Indians and under Chief Little Turtle. And 50% of that contingent was wiped out. They didn't even bother covering the retreat. They just got the hell out of there if they wanted to live. And it was a 50% wipeout.
So we have Josiah Harmer, we have the General Sinclair, and let's not forget we have a constitutional government at the same time, right? Just kind of
Yep.
getting up to speed. And so now we
Okay.
have an issue with um, Article 2 or the executive branch to deal with. So while this is going on, and you've got Arthur St. Clair, that is a governor, commander in chief of the Northwest Territories, what's the what's happening with the prez?
That's a good question because we're in an engagement right here in our in chapter 3. We're in a fight right now with the Maumee Rapid Indians. This is a military operation happening right here in the contiguous United States. There was no act of war. This was a police action. Sound familiar?
Yeah, we don't need any declaration of war to go into any foreign countries.
Well, yeah, so that's what it was. The Northwest Territories were considered anytime it's territorial, it's considered foreign to the constitutional government. It's foreign in terms of constitutional, right? So you got membership in the Confederacy, and what constitutes a Confederate agreement among the states for their mutual benefit and perpetuity, and then you have territory that is not a part of that constitutes foreign territory. So you have the United States government on the contiguous continent of the United States fighting an engagement, a police action against the Maumee Rapid Indians and the English as they were holed up in the property that they had given to the United States for the United States were in there trying to take it. And they were trying to frustrate this movement and the settlement program and the government's disposal program as much as they possibly could. The English.
So I, I shouldn't ask this on the video, but I think other people are going to deal with it like I am. I This has come up before. I don't even know if I can articulate it. And I'm hoping you're going to just get what I'm going. So I'm sending brainwaves out to you. You've got the red that's the territorial. You've got the whites that's the property. We've read a lot about foreign territories. We've read about constitutional rights are not guaranteed in um, in under federal. I don't even know what to say. Um, but I'm confused because you said that at least I think you did. The territories are seen as foreign. Did you say constitutional government or to the territorial government?
Yeah, the territories are considered as foreign territory when you compare politically and otherwise,
Hmm.
legally,
Hmm.
to the constitutional system,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
So anything in red is
Hmm.
considered foreign territory, and anything in white is considered part of the Confederate or Union of States. Now we're not a Confederate anymore; we're a
Okay.
Union of
Okay.
States.
All right. That's where,
So
okay. That's where
yeah,
I was
so if
missing
it's
it.
in white, it's considered part of the Union. If it's in
Okay.
red, it's considered foreign territory, and that includes Indian um, tribal. Uh, uh, part of that is wrapped up in the treaties with the Indian nations.
Okay. All right. That offered a great deal of clarity. And I think anybody that is confused about the question, it should become clearer once you're reading the book.
And
Uh,
that's why the guarantee of private rights are not applicable
well, it can't.
in the red,
Yeah,
is because it's considered foreign.
right. Makes that right there. I don't know why. Maybe I just need to hear it again. But the way you just said it and the way you said it earlier, planted that firmly. I feel much better about it now. Thank you. So So you had the Territorial Army for territorial acquisitions. So what is so going back to it, what was the deal with what's going on with the president at this time, do you suppose?
Well, so the president of the United States, he had outsourced his commander in chief power, not stating that he could never take up the power if he needed it, right? But he had outsourced it domestically. Because remember, the territorial system was designed to create a buffer zone between the foreign territories that we had ownership of, or well, we didn't have ownership of them at the time, but the foreign territories we were trying to run our program in, and the constitutional government to prevent the movement of political influence from here into there. That was
Mm.
what this was supposed to do. The territorial the territorial government was intended to act as a buffer between the two.
So the
And
president
but what happened
literally,
is, let's go back up here. When they to create enabling legislation for the program to operate west of the 98th meridian, they removed the buffer zone. The territorial government no longer applicable anymore. Now the government, as it says in the Downs versus Bidwell decision, the government would operate directly against the remainder of the territory. And because it was engaged directly with the territory, it from then till now has been a political influence scheme. That's what
wow,
creates the vassal state arrangement.
unbelievable. Wow. Okay, so then we've got I was going down, let's see, talking to you about General Wayne, the Battle of the Maumee Rapids, 1794, ending the Miami Indian Scourge. Let's see, the Legion was disbanded. The regiment apparently they got their butts kicked and then they had to reorganize. 1812, a
Yep.
skirmish broke out with the indigenous people not far from Detroit. A complete transformation. Let's see, territorial war machine was under the Northwest Ordinance, not Congress. I think that's an important thing to continue to bring up so that people understand that, right? Since you now had mentioned that the president had um, discharged somewhat or outsourced his commander in chief power to Arthur Sinclair. You go into
Yeah.
the Militia Act of 1792 to allow the U.S. Army to call up the militia whenever necessary. And the standing army was actually increased in 1855. And the whole idea wasn't to, to tyrannicize, citizens, right? It was used for westward expansion, right? For the expansion of the
Right.
territories,
That's right. They
right?
were just
So,
trying to protect the interests of the United States, protect the settlers that were moving in there to, because there were hostile people in there that were hostile to what we were trying to accomplish as a nation. That was the Indian populations. Anytime we would go in there, the Indians just attack us. Right? They didn't want anybody in there. It's not like the United States native population welcomed us with open arms. Let's be honest. Every time we sent settlers into the possessions, they were attacked.
and I hate to bring this up as a deviation from the book, and you can say skip it, but since we are talking about the indigenous people, and that seems to be a pretty noteworthy topic today, I don't know if there would be people that would be watching it going, "Oh, we'll see those white, those white people just completely just wipe the Indians off the map and all of that." There are things that I've read that have there was somewhat a degree of that. There was also the missing application that Thomas Jefferson when he ended up writing the Jeffersonian Bible and things like that. I'm not sure if there's a connection there. All I know is that when we're talking about the war with the Indians, I can only put myself in a position where I can imagine myself as this the as these as the Indians that were there before we were. Is that right?
Well, the Indians were there before we were, but
Right.
it's the history of the world is one of expansion,
That's exactly right.
occupation,
Right.
military conquest,
Right.
everything. So if
Right.
we're going to talk about it here, we got to talk about it in Europe.
Right.
Well, the
For sure.
Europeans don't want to talk about it because all
Because
the
what?
European territories changed hands how many times?
Right.
The same thing here. It's no different. We sent our settlers into the Americas, after we had, other nations had ownership of it. We acquired that ownership from them, and we started sending our settlers out, and the Indians were wiping them out.
Hmm.
They were being attacked. All the settlers were being attacked. So the United States military that was underneath Arthur St. Clair's command was in charge of answering to that without having to go through the constitutional system to wait and deliberate and all that stuff. Within moments, once they heard about an attack, they could muster a group and send them out there to go take that on right away.
And I think it's also important to
Without that, yeah, without that rapid response, we could not have settled the United States. The Indians and the English would have killed us all out before we could muster a response.
yeah. Well, I think it's important to remember too when you look at history, and this is kind of a current events argument where, people want to go back. You've got us that want to go back to the Constitution. You got some of these other indigenous folks. They're just like, well, they stole our land and we want our land back. I don't think when I look at history, anything ever went back to the way it was. There were things that happened over time for a variety of reasons, and they are what they are. And I think I would just leave it at that. Um,
So this book, I want to make something very clear because there are going to be people that attack this. This book does not take a position, politically or otherwise.
that's
I'm
right.
not siding with the United States government. I'm not siding with the native populations. I'm siding with nobody. Nobody. I'm just here to tell you how it went down. This was a government's program, and this is from the perspective of the people that created the program, what they had to do to to operate the program.
Right.
Now, people could read this and go, well, from the United States government's point of view, it's all a bunch of BS. Really don't care. I don't care. This story I got out of the military archives.
Yep.
Okay. So I really don't care what all the factions have to say about it. Don't give two squirts.
Good. And I think that I just felt like that was good too, because you never know who's going to be watching the videos and what kind of biases they're going to bring in. So I thought it was good to neutralize that. I think
Absolutely.
we're up on our time. I think we got about 5 minutes left or something, but we have one more paragraph on 30 before we get into the political nature of the Civil War. And I had written you had talked about the Union of the North and the Confederacy of the South again, two opposing theories regarding how the constitutional government would operate under the Confederation of States, or as a union. Uh, the let's see, and you can carry it away anytime you want. The North saw the South's dependence on it as a severe problem, and the South was using to defend its activities was that they were members of the Confederacy entitled to constitutional protection. I felt like there was some. I just wasn't sure if I had.
Well,
I have a.
in our system of government right now, because of all the factions that have they've acquired a lot of power, and these are factions that at one time were minorities that have turned into larger minorities and sometimes even approximating a majority at times. But these minorities have a substantial amount of political power. They've seized it through a variety of sources, right? And the slavery component is huge in the United States. You got them wanting reparations and this sort of thing. You have a political movement to try to protect the Jews, a political movement to try to protect Islam. You have all these movements in the United States to protect certain classes of people, right? When the system wasn't designed to protect one class of persons, it was
Yeah.
designed to consolidate all of the classes of citizens into one category and give them all the equal amount of rights. But what these factions are doing is that they say, well, we don't want to have anything to do with the white man's rights. We want to have rights of our own, right?
Sure.
When the only rights in the system are contained in the Bill of Rights that were given to the white man, and those are the preeminent rights that exist in the system. If you go to the legislature and you have the legislature legislate for you some specific rights, they will never rise to the level of protection that the Bill of Rights rises to because the legislature gave them to you.
Hmm. Amen. That's a true statement. Yeah. So let's do me a let's
So
do
you can hate white people all you want and say screw those white people and their rights, and like you reject the same rights that I have to protect myself. Go ahead. I don't give two squirts.
yeah, just don't make me a part of it.
Yeah, I don't want no
Anyway,
part of that.
well, I think we're gonna shut off. I think we're gonna terminate it right here. We'll start with the political nature of the Civil War conflict on the next video, if you don't
Okay.
mind. Um, and do you have any closing comments, my friend?
I do not, man. We're from here on out, it's going to get a lot more complicated. There's going to be a lot more to talk about.
Oh,
So,
gosh, I swear. Don't be discouraged though. Don't be discouraged. It's a lot of reading, but it's fun. And it is what it is. It's just important. It's you're going to be people that are viewing and listening and reading are going to be on the cutting edge, man. If I could say it, they're going to be on the cutting edge of something that nobody else knows. And that alone is
that's
worth
right.
is what makes it worth learning. And nothing pleases me more than to be able to do it with you, man. So I appreciate it. I think we'll terminate this video for now. If you don't have any further thoughts or any words of wisdom, we'll go ahead and let everybody go. And we'll ask you guys to follow us and do it next time. Please buy a book, The History of Federal Lands in the United States.com. The link will be in the description box. If you have any questions, you can go to Ron's website, or I think you can do that through the video. And if anybody's interested in interviews or anything like that, you can use the contact form on his website as well. So until next time, everybody, thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Tom. See you next time.